So this video is kind of the result of a conversation I was having with my friend Andrew, who blogs over at West Coast Reactionaries. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description. They do good stuff. Definitely should check them out. But we were talking, and he was telling me, he's like, RG, I've just kind of let go of a lot of kind of my hatred, and I've just kind of starting to find a bit of peace. And I just thought that was interesting. So it's something I often kind of forget about. Just what I kind of used to be like, how I've dealt with a lot of my issues, and kind of how I've become a better person over time. Because in my youth, I used to be extremely, well, in my youth, I'm only in my 20s. Well, when I was younger, I used to be just extremely angry all the time. I would just rage, I'd scream, etc., etc. I used to have these megalomaniacal, I'm bipolar, so literally megalomaniacal rages where where I would think about how much I wanted to kill everybody on Earth, how humanity was evil, etc., etc. I'd lash out at everybody, including myself. I just become a vicious, bitter, angry person. And it was funny because I kind of hated Christianity, and I hated a lot of kind of Eastern religions for similar reasons, because I felt they taught kind of an indifference to suffering, an indifference to evil. They say love your enemy. They say learn to forgive. You have to forgive someone. You have to detach yourself from reality, and that's kind of the key to happiness. And to me, it just seemed like indifference in the face of evil. And I felt that to be a good person, you had to cling as tightly as you could. You had to cling as tightly as you could to everything bad, everything untrue, everything wrong, and you had to kind of catalog it and try to just write it. To try to, I guess, as the hourglass is leaking sand, put every grain of sand back in. And it was when I was converting to Christianity, I started to kind of look into the issue again. What is forgiveness? And I'm sorry if this is kind of going to be stream of consciousness, but you'll see where I'm going in a bit. And I forget, I think it was on Catholic Answers forums where I get most of my apologetics, where someone said the thing you have to understand is forgiveness. Right, now I remember. I was looking up forgiveness in an abusive parent, because that's kind of like because the Bible says honor thy father and thy mother, but how do you honor a father and mother who abuse you? And I'm not just talking that they didn't buy you something. I mean, like they beat the shit out of you for no reason, or they sexually abused you. The Bible says honor your mother and father. How do you honor them? How do you forgive someone who betrayed such a sacred trust? And the person said, you have to understand, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you. It's about letting yourself move on. It's about you having the weight lifted from you. It's when you forgive someone, it's not you saying that what they did isn't bad. It's not you saying that they don't deserve whatever punishment they deserve. It's not you saying that you'll trust them again. Trust is something very different. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you'll ever trust them again in the same way. Like maybe someone stole money from you, and you'll forgive them, and you might even still have a relationship of some description with them, but you won't put that same trust in them. You won't put them in a position where they can do that to you again. And that's just prudence, and prudence is perfectly okay. But what forgiveness ultimately comes down to is taking away the power someone else has over you. Because when you don't forgive someone, rage burns hot, and it eventually burns away at you. It consumes you. There's a reason why rage is associated with fire. It becomes like a drug. It triggers adrenaline rushes, both metaphorically and physically. It's easy to kind of get addicted to anger, to get addicted to rage, to just kind of to fuel your addiction. You just have to look at every single injustice, every single slight, every single thing and it just continues to build and build and build and build and build, and then as it builds, it's that scene in A Christmas Carol where Marley has all the accountant books and chains on him, and he says, "These chains that I forged during my lifetime remain on me in death." And that's kind of what hatred and anger and resentment ultimately kind of leads to. So when you forgive someone, what you're really saying is, I don't wish you ill anymore. I don't hold this against you in a personal sense anymore. It's more of anything, it's an acknowledgement that you've moved beyond it. And like I said, it doesn't mean that you are saying what they did is right. You can, let's say you have the love of a saint and you forgive someone who kills your wife. That doesn't mean that man shouldn't be put to death, because that's a separate issue. Justice is different than forgiveness. Just because you personally forgive the man and you personally can come to terms with it, and you've personally kind of let the rage leave you, it doesn't mean that man doesn't deserve to die. It doesn't mean that justice doesn't demand his life. But what it does is it takes away his power over you. Because when you hate something, to a certain extent, it can control you. You're just reacting to it. And I think that's a problem a lot of us have, is we're angered by horrible things, terrible things. A lot of the stuff that we are having to experience and that is being acceptable is hideous, and it's to our credit that we feel such disgust and anger towards it. But what there's a danger of having happen, and probably the best way to describe this is with an example, common filth. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people here watch Common Filth. Common Filth is a man who cannot forgive. He can't forgive. He can't accept things. Acceptance we'll get to in a second, but it's very similar to forgiveness. He can't accept things. He can't forgive. He can't move beyond things. And it's kind of ironic because his whole philosophy of his show is trust in that which does not change. Do not trust in the fallible, which is man. And I agree. And that's kind of what I'm saying. But I don't think emotionally he is like that. He comes across as being a man on the brink of insanity, who just you can just feel it every time he reads another story. He just is kind of addicted to it. It's like a drug to him. He just finds this like puppy play, like people using each other as human toilets, like people marrying their children, just the most fucking horrific stuff he can find. And in a sense, he's kind of a masochist. He kind of enjoys it because it becomes this kind of all-consuming thing. And when you're in this state, when you kind of are blaming everybody else but yourself for your problems, it's kind of liberating in that sense, because then you have no responsibility, you have no agency. There's nothing you have to do. You just have to sit there and be angry about what's happening to you. And what that does is, do you think Common Filth is a man who's effective? I mean, I guess he is his own way, but do you think he's a kind of a functional person? He's so buried under the weight of his disgust and his hate, the man sounds like he's barely sane anymore. Think of how much more effective he could be if he could just learn to let go of some of it, if he could just jettison some of the refuse in his soul, if he could become lighter. Because ultimately you can say, well, the rage fuels me, the rage keeps me alive, and to a certain extent it does. But at the same time, it also can turn you into a kind of a pathetic husk of a man. It can make you like Common Filth. It can make you like I used to be. It can make you like a lot of those kind of white nationalist neo-Nazi guys who are just so consumed in their hatred for Jews that they've lost all perspective. I think it was in one of the TRS episodes that the Shlomo says, I control you, I make you hate me because then I can control you. And to a certain extent they can. That level of just kind of blind anger and hatred, it shuts down your ability to view the situation objectively. It shuts down your ability to really be effective. And I guess that's part of it. You need to forgive and you need to accept things for you. To get rid of, to deal with your own suffering. You just need to. Just in the same way you personally as a human demand forgiveness and demand confession. So likewise, you need to kind of be able to forgive and accept things to move on with your life. And that's to me what I think love your neighbor means. Love your enemy means. I think what it means ultimately is you wish the best for them and you do not wish them ill will in a personal sense, even if you have to destroy them. Because it says at the end, Christ will come with fire and sword and he will rain down upon death and just judgment upon the wicked. Christ is not going to withhold his sword out of his sense of forgiveness, out of his mercy. The man who told you to love your neighbor, love your enemy, is also the same man who told people to, if you do not have swords, sell your cloak and buy swords. He told sinners, look, you gotta go and you gotta stop sinning. And he's also the guy who said, look, I'm here to give you this warning. I have come and I will die on your behalf. But you guys have to smarten the fuck up. You have to stop being degenerates. You have to stop having an evil society. And if you don't do that, I'm going to come back. And it's not going to be pleasant when I come back in all my glory. So I'm giving you this period to redeem yourselves and to try to be better people out of compassion to you. And to me, that's what's loving your enemy, is you say, look, I understand what they've done. And I acknowledge it, and I wish that things were better. But for the sake of my own soul, I can't just become a sadist and just delight in every act of suffering inflicted against them. And I know this is hard for people like ISIS, but in part for ISIS, it's hard sometimes to separate these things from the context, because the ISIS war is a war of terror. It's a war of morals in which viciousness is just kind of part of the game as it's being played in that context. So that's kind of the ISIS thing. But I just kind of use that as an example. So Christ says, love your enemy. That doesn't mean you don't destroy your enemy. That doesn't mean that your enemy isn't a detestable, horrible person, and it is your duty under heaven to bring them down. That's not what love your enemy means. It means wishing the best for someone who wants the worst for you, even if as you destroy them. It's kind of, I guess, related a bit with the idea that you respect your enemy. That you take them seriously, and once you're able to start doing that, once you're able to start moving beyond your anger and looking at the situation more objectively, it's really only then that you begin to fight. It's only then when I think you really become effective, when you really become capable of being a true soldier for Christ, of just being a better person. So what does this all come back to? I know I've gone on for 15 minutes, but this is a really long topic. Back in university, I took a course called Philosophy of the Self. It was a damn good class. But what they basically focused on was kind of the cycle of human experience. That the experience is defined as beginning, middle, and ends, and that pain is caused by the inability of us to accept that something's changed. Maybe it's because, and that's to a certain extent what nostalgia is it stems from the often extreme painful nature of nostalgia, is that deep down you haven't accepted that something's changed. And not accepting something's changed can be something as simple as acknowledging that just something's behind you. Like maybe I'm not in university anymore. Maybe I'm not. I have to have like a serious adult job. Maybe I have to try to do something different in my life. It can be any number of different changes, any number of different things that have gone to end. Maybe it's a relationship that's over and people don't accept it. And I think it was Ernest Hemingway who described the state of a man who goes to this kind of upscale cafe every day, and he just sits there all night and drinks coffee there till it finishes, and then he goes home. And Ernest Hemingway says this man is a disaster, because what would really be healthy for him is to go home, to just cry and cry and cry until all his tears were done, and then just to be fine. Because the man was suffering from some deep trauma at some point in his past. And we all have traumas, and our ability to accept them and let go of them is what I think allows us to be sane. So, like, I was holding on to incidents since people who bullied me back in grade school and high school. And I was holding on to them and their resentment and their hate and the hate I had for them. And I was letting that just kind of color my entire view of the world. I was letting that kind of change who I was and become who I was. And it didn't make me effective as opposing them. I was just being kind of an angry whiner. I didn't really oppose them for the right reasons. I just opposed them because it was self-serving. It was just kind of self-serving moralizing. So ultimately that's where pain comes from in life. The inability to kind of accept things. And I thought I might, I always like to undertake educations to better myself. So educations will be like, I look at a bunch of a particular topic. Maybe I'll say, look, I don't know enough about the history of this country. At the minute, I'm kind of on a roll to try to educate myself about Israel. And just kind of the history of Israel, the internal politics of it, to try to get a feel of kind of the soul of the nation. Because that's the kind of thing that just really interests me. But anyways, so I was on one of those, so I was reading a lot of kind of the classic books of the world. And I had gone to chapters, and when I was there was a illustrated, beautiful copy of Tao Te Ching, whatever it's called, the one Lao Tzu wrote, the sayings of the Tao. Tao, of course, being the way, which is, I guess you could kind of say, the Tao is sort of a non-anthropomorphic or non-personal divine. It's a bit like karma or asha or similar systems where there's kind of this cosmic order or cosmic meaning or cosmic path that you follow along. But the Tao Te Ching is kind of written in the a stream of maxims. I don't know if you call them little poems, but just little sayings. And it's framed in the concept of the character of the master. That is the master of the Tao, but in a sense the master of himself and the master of reality. And they're all things like other men panic, and other men panic, but the master stays silent, for the master knows. Other men will... Okay, here I brought it up. Therefore the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise, things disappear, and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess. She acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. That is why she lasts forever. Basically, one of the philosophies of Taoism, or kind of the core philosophy, is that non-action is also a form of action. By not doing something, you actually are doing something. Choosing not to act, when not to get invested in something, when to not get involved, when to not kind of insert your point of view, is an art that's every bit as important as knowing when to act and how to act when you're acting. So, like, what they're saying here is the master teaches without saying anything, because as opposed to a master of action who would just kind of physically teach. That's why always in like Japanese things or whatever, they send them on a quest. They don't just explain it to them, they send them on a quest, or they send them to go do something where they'll get their knowledge in some other way. Practice not doing anything will fall into place. And they believe that this is the other half of everything that's always neglected. Learning the art of not doing things. So, like, here's another one. Let's see here. The Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born, thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself. Thus it is present for all being things. And in a sense, Tao is a bit different, but I kind of see God in this way. God was never born. God can never die. God is infinite because he is all loving. It's just kind of a self-evident aspect of his being. The master stays behind. That is why she is ahead. So it's like saying to be master is to like, no, sometimes you have to stay behind. Sometimes you have to lose, etc. Because to us, we're always like, well, you got to win. You got to win. You got to come in first. You got to get that extra promotion. You got to get the extra job. But kind of like the master is detached from these things, is detached from anger, is detached from very kind of basic physical desires. And that's why they've become a master. They've become, I guess, what would Evola call them, an aristocrat of the soul. Let's see here. The master stays behind, and that is why she is ahead. She is detached from all things. That is why she is one of them. Because she has let herself go, she is perfectly fulfilled. And that's the truth of the matter. Basically, what all this is leading towards is, I'm just looking at different views. The middle one was kind of more psychological and philosophical. The first one was Christian. The last one was kind of Eastern or Taoist. But I think what the takeaway of all of these is what they're saying is you have to learn to accept things that are over. You have to learn to accept that there is horror in the world. You have to learn to live with the horror. It's not going away. Your problems aren't going away. So you have to accept them. You have to take a certain degree of resoluteness when dealing with them. You have to kind of take what the Stoic does. The Stoic faces trouble and he shrugs his shoulders and says, so what? There is more trouble, there is more suffering, it means nothing to me. I will face this like I face everything else, with strength and with dispassion. I think to a certain extent that's what you have to do in life. They teach us mindfulness in therapy. They teach us to let go of things, to forgive people, to take ideas or thoughts and to just accept them without judging. Because so much of our pain comes from our minds, and kind of feelings are not the same thing. And the feelings are so intense because they are actually a part of you. So the feelings are a part of you, and they come from within you, and that makes you think that they're true. And they may be horrible things, and that may be part of your anger, as you're constantly bombarded by these horrible things. But what you have to do is you just have to accept it. You have to say, yes, I'm having these feelings. Yes, something bad has happened to me. Yes, I acknowledge that these things happened. But I have to accept that they happened. I can't keep living in the world before these things happened, before my life changed, before I changed. Because all that will do is fill you with pain. You have to open yourself up to the divine. You have to open yourself up to the possibility of becoming a different person, of changing. To an extent, it's kind of like growing up. Growing up is a process we never really finish. In fact, one could argue it continues for eternity as we continue to infinitely grow. You have to learn to forgive. You have to learn to accept things, to say this happened to me, etc. Because if you don't, then these people will continue to have power over you. These people will continue to control you. These outside forces. If you want to take away your opponent's power over you, you have to forgive them. And that was the example the martyrs said. The Christian martyrs set an example that way. Whenever they went to the arena, they said, okay, this is great. We're going to go to the arena. We're going to get eaten by animals. We accept this, and they would pray for the people who were going to do it, and they'd forgive them. And they would often make like snarky comments right before they died. Like one of them was told, all you have to say is away the atheists. Because they considered Christians to be atheists. So he just went and pointed at the crowd and he said, away the atheists, because you don't believe in the one true God. And that just pissed off the governor, and then they just sent him in and he got eaten by animals with a smile on his face. And the Romans looked at that, and their own people were like, holy shit, these guys are truly, they're the master. They get it. They've kind of achieved that aristocratic indifference to death. And if you can't threaten a man with death, if you can't threaten a man with pain, he's no longer really a man anymore. He's become, to a certain extent, a god. And I guess that's kind of my roundabout point, is once you kind of free yourself from all this anger, all this rage, all these things that distract you, that make you irrational, that make you have such difficulty doing even basic things and can consume you and can cause you to commit suicide or murder someone. Once you've freed yourself from all of this and kind of moved beyond it as much as you can, and God knows I haven't moved beyond all of this. God knows I still have the same struggles all of you do. It's a lifelong process that continues on after death. But once you've started that, you can finally start to have some peace in your life. You can finally start to admit your faults and start to move forward, to move towards to try to become a better person, to try to seek kind of inward and outward perfection. There's a pragmatic thing. There's a pragmatic reason for adopting these same things. Think that it is you can forgive people, or you should forgive people. Forgiveness is just part of kind of the way of life, how we come to terms with things, and what we need to become effective soldiers. To my mind, the soldier for Christ is someone who has accepted Christ's premise. They have accepted, if I die in your service, then I shall live again once more forever. And because of that, they become basically the perfect soldier, because they no longer fear death. They are motivated by a certain, and that is why they have become truly great. So I hope that made some kind of sense. Maybe that was a bit helpful. Maybe I just kind of babbled on, but thanks guys for listening. God bless you. Have a good evening. This is Argent, and I'll talk to you guys soon.